An unknown number sent me a 19-second video of my husband getting married. He had told me he was at a sales conference in Louisville. I watched it 4 times, and then I typed one word and sent it to him. By midnight, I had 94 missed calls. Good evening, and thank you for spending this hour with me. It's Clara. If you'd take a second to subscribe and leave a like, it genuinely helps this channel keep going. And tell me in the comments what city you're listening from tonight. I love seeing how far these stories travel. People like to say the truth always comes out. I never believed that. In my experience, the truth mostly sits there, quiet and patient. In a drawer, somebody forgot to lock. It doesn't come out. Somebody lets it out. And when it finally came out of mine, it came from the last person on earth I would have expected. I was 42 years old, director of operations at a regional hospital in Oxford, Mississippi, which meant I spent my days making sure that the surgical schedule and the staffing grid and the supply chain all touched each other at the right angles. I was good at it. I have a specific kind of brain. It sees where the numbers stop agreeing with each other, and it will not rest until it knows why. I had been married to Grant Whitmore for 13 years. I kept my own name, Clara Dunmore, which had irritated his mother for the first 4 Christmases and then stopped mattering. We had a brick house on Locust Street with a screened porch and a magnolia in the front yard that dropped those enormous waxy leaves all fall like it was firing people. We had 2 cats, Otis and Clementine. We had a Sunday routine involving the farmer's market and a bag of pecans we never got around to shelling. We didn't have children. That had been its own long private grief, and we'd made a kind of truce with it around year 8, and I believed the truce was mutual. Grant sold pharmaceuticals for a mid-size specialty company. Regional territory, the whole Gulf South. He traveled 2 or 3 days most weeks, and had for 11 years, and I had never once questioned it, because why would I? He called every night. He came home smelling like hotel shampoo, dragging that gray roller bag with the busted zipper pull he refused to replace. He brought me things: a tin of pralines from Baton Rouge, a refrigerator magnet shaped like a shrimp. Once, a paperback he'd found in a mobile bookstore, because the author was one I'd mentioned liking 2 years earlier, and I remember holding that book and thinking, this is what a good marriage is. It's someone remembering something you said in a parking lot in 2016. Now I look at that memory and I understand what it actually was. It was a receipt. He was paying for something. I can tell you exactly when the ground started shifting, because I've gone back over it so many times it's worn smooth. It was a Wednesday in October, 11 months before the video. Grant came home from the dentist with his teeth 2 shades whiter. He'd had them done. Not a cleaning. Done. He said the office was running a promotion and he'd figured why not, and I laughed at him, and he took it well, and that was that. Then the gym membership. Then the protein powder that lived on top of the refrigerator and made the kitchen smell faintly of vanilla chalk. Then the suits. Grant had worn the same 3 suits since the Obama administration. And suddenly there were new ones, cut closer, in colors he'd never worn. Charcoal with a faint blue thread running through it. He bought shoes that had to be broken in. I told myself a story about all of it. Men hit 45, and they look in the mirror and they decide to fight. That's normal. That's healthy, even. Isn't that what we're supposed to want? A husband who takes care of himself. And here's the part that still stings, because it's the part where I participated in my own deception. Every single time some small alarm went off in the back of my head, I reached over and silenced it myself. I told myself I wasn't the kind of wife who snooped. I wasn't the kind of woman who made scenes. I was reasonable. I was easy to live with. I had built an entire identity around being the person who didn't need to check. He knew that about me. I want to be very clear about this. He didn't just take advantage of my trust. He took advantage of my pride in being trusting. The phone was the last sign, and it was the loudest, and I ignored it the hardest. For 13 years, that phone had lived face up on the kitchen counter, next to the fruit bowl, unlocked, uninteresting. Around February, it started going everywhere with him. Bathroom, garage, face-down stand. One night in April, I leaned across him on the couch to get the remote, and his hand came down flat on the screen so fast that it made a sound. We both laughed. He said something about a compliance issue at work, some contract thing. I said something about him being very important. We watched the rest of the show, but something in me had gone cold and still. Not suspicion, exactly. Something's more like the feeling you get in the hospital when a monitor makes a noise it has never made before. You don't know yet what it means. You only know the room has changed. The video came on a Tuesday afternoon in September at 2:41 while I was standing in a conference room reviewing a staffing proposal with 2 department heads and a spreadsheet projected on the wall. My personal phone buzzed in my blazer pocket. I ignored it. It buzzed again once. When we broke, I pulled it out. Unknown number, Tennessee area code. No text. Just a video file, 19 seconds. I almost deleted it. I get spam like everybody. I stood in the hallway, outside that conference room with the vending machine. Humming next to me, and I pressed play, and my life split into a before and an after in the amount of time it takes to microwave nothing. The footage was handheld. Somebody standing toward the back. A small chapel, the kind with fake stained glass and a carpet runner. Fewer than a dozen people in the pews, and at the front in the charcoal suit with the blue thread, my husband. His hair had been cut. He was smiling in a way I had not seen him smile in a very long time, and I noticed that first before I noticed anything else, and it is that detail I would give a great deal to unsee. Across from him stood a young woman in a short white dress, holding a bouquet of white roses. A man in a robe was speaking. Grant took her left hand and slid a ring onto it. The person filming made a small sound, half laugh, half something else. The video ended. I stood there and watched it again, and once more. He had told me he was in Louisville. He had called me the night before at 9:15 and asked whether I'd remembered to give Otis his thyroid pill. I had said yes. He had said, "Good night, sweetheart, love you," and I had said, "Love you too," and then I had gone to sleep in our bed, in our house, on Locust Street. I want to tell you that I screamed, or that my knees went. That's not what happened. What happened was that I put the phone in my pocket, went back into the conference room, and finished the staffing meeting. I remember making a joke about the surgery schedule. I remember someone laughing. At 4:15, I sat in my car in the parking deck with the engine off and the September heat pressing against the windshield, and I opened my messages, and I found Grant's name, and I typed one word, "Congratulations." I typed the period, too. I remember thinking about the period. Then I put the phone face down on the passenger seat, and I drove home with the radio off. By 6 o'clock, I had 31 missed calls. By 9, I had 68. By midnight, 94. I let it buzz on the kitchen counter next to the fruit bowl, in the exact spot it used to live back when it had nothing to hide, and I fed the cats, and I ate a bowl of cereal standing up because it was the only thing I could imagine swallowing. There were 4 texts, spaced out across the evening. "We need to talk." "Pick up, please. It's not what you think it is. Clara, I love you. Please, please just pick up." I read them in order. I remember thinking that it's not what you think it is. was an extraordinary thing to send to a woman who had just watched you put a ring on someone else's finger in front of a minister. What exactly did he imagine I thought it was? And here is the strange thing. I was not sobbing. I was not throwing anything. What I felt was a kind of terrible clarity, like someone had finally cleaned a window I hadn't known was dirty. Every unexplained thing I had explained away for 11 months lined itself up and reported for duty. At 11 that night, I opened my laptop at the kitchen table and I made 2 lists. The first was assets. The house on Locust, bought in 2016 for $329,000, currently worth somewhere around $455,000. His leased Acura, my paid-off Highlander, the joint checking, the joint savings, my 401N, his 401 Nang, and his stock plan, the home equity line of credit we'd opened 4 years ago for a kitchen renovation we never did. I wrote it all down the way I'd inventory a supply closet. The second list was evidence. The video, which I had already emailed to my personal address, backed up to cloud storage, and airdropped to the laptop. The unknown number with the date and time. Screenshots of his 4 texts. The name of the conference he'd claimed, the Ohio Valley Specialty Sales Summit, and the hotel he'd mentioned in passing, a Marriott near the airport. At 1 in the morning, I looked up the conference. There was no Ohio Valley Specialty Sales Summit. Not that September. Not that year. Not anywhere. Then I let myself feel it. I gave myself exactly 20 minutes because I know myself, and I know that if I don't put a fence around a feeling, it will eat the whole field. 20 minutes of the humiliation. 20 minutes of every trip and every pecan praline and every hotel soap kiss going through the wash again in a new color. 20 minutes of understanding that a man does not marry someone else on a Tuesday unless he has already built a life that does not have you in it. He hadn't fallen out of love with me. That would have been survivable. That would have been ordinary. What he had done was plan a future that required me to not exist, and then come home and ask about the cat's thyroid medication. At the 21st minute, I closed the laptop and went to bed, and I want you to know I slept. Deeply. Better than I had in months. Because somewhere between the second list and the fence around the feeling, I had stopped being a wife and become something else. I had one advantage, and it was the only one I needed. Grant knew that I knew. He did not know what I was going to do about it, and I intended to keep that gap open as long as humanly possible. Ruth Dabney's office was above a bank on the square, up a staircase with a worn brass rail. She was somewhere past 60, gray blonde, in a cardigan, with reading glasses on a chain. A colleague of mine whose divorce had gone through 4 years earlier had to me in one sentence. She doesn't raise her voice. She just files. I got in the next afternoon on a cancellation. $350 for the consultation, which I paid in cash, deliberately, from an envelope I'd taken out of an ATM that morning. I told her everything in order. I showed her the video. I showed her the texts. I showed her both spreadsheets, and she went through them page by page, without saying anything, and when she finished, she took her glasses off. "You haven't answered him," she said. "Not since the one word, no, don't." She put the glasses back on. "Let's talk about where you actually are, because most people in your chair think they're in a worse position than they are, and you're in a considerably better one." What she explained to me over the next 40 minutes changed the entire shape of the next year of my life, and I'm going to repeat it here because it's the part I most needed and least expected. Mississippi, she said, is not a state where a person can simply decide to be divorced. There's no unilateral no fault. If both parties agree, they can file on irreconcilable differences, and it's over. If one party doesn't agree, the other has to prove grounds. Adultery is grounds. Documented adultery is very good grounds. Which means, she said, he cannot get out of this marriage without either your signature or a judge. And you don't have to give him either one on his timetable. Then she told me the second thing. Mississippi is one of a small handful of states that still recognizes what's called alienation of affection. It's not a crime, it's a civil tort, and it isn't brought against the spouse. It's brought against the third party, the one who came in. It's rare, she said. It's hard. It requires real proof of a real marriage, real intent, real damage. It's also, she said, and her voice didn't change at all, occasionally very effective. And the third thing, Grant had stood in a chapel in Sevier County, Tennessee, and to get the license for that ceremony he would have had to sign an application swearing, under oath, that he was not currently married. That's not a divorce issue, Ruth said. That's a different kind of problem entirely. Chancery Court handles the divorce. Circuit Court handles a tort claim, and a false statement on a marriage license application is handled by neither of those because it's handled by a district attorney. She then gave me a set of instructions, and I wrote them down on the back of an envelope, and I am going to give them to you now because if you are listening to this at 2 a.m. with your stomach in your throat, this is the part you need. Don't go into his phone or his email without permission. Whatever you find you may not be able to use, and you may create a problem for yourself. Don't move money. Don't drain anything. Document what exists, where it is, and what the balance is on the day you learn. Don't post anything. Not a vague line, not a song lyric, not a photo of a wine glass. Nothing. Don't tell mutual friends. Tell 1 or 2 people whose loyalty you would bet your house on, because you may be betting your house. Don't send the midnight text. Every furious message you send becomes a document. Every calm one does too, and calm reads better. Are you sure you want to proceed? Ruth asked at the end, and it wasn't doubt, it was procedure. I said I had never been more certain of anything in my life, and I meant it in a way that surprised me. Grant's plane landed at 6:20. I got home at 5:40 and I got out my mother's sewing machine. It's a 1962 Singer, black and gold, heavy as a car battery, and it had been sitting in a closet since she died. I don't sew. I put it on the kitchen table, and I got out the little bottle of oil and the tiny screwdriver. And I started cleaning 40 years of lint out of the bobbin case because I needed my hands to be doing something, and because I have never in my life been able to think while sitting still. He came through the door at 6:50. He had grocery store peonies wrapped in cellophane, and he looked like a man who had not slept or shaved or eaten, and when he saw me he said my name like a question, like he wasn't sure it was still mine. "Hey," I said, "I didn't look up from the bobbin case. Have you eaten?" I want to describe his face to you, but I'm not sure I can. He had prepared for a wall of things. Screaming, weeping, a suitcase in the hall, a lawyer's letter, a locked door. He had rehearsed all of it on the plane. What he had not prepared for was his wife oiling a sewing machine and asking him if he wanted supper. He set the peonies on the counter. He sat down across the table, and then he talked for 2 hours. The story came out sideways, in pieces, changing shape as it went, the way a story does when it's being assembled in real time to fit whatever expression is on the listener's face. Her name was Kelsey. Kelsey Rourke. He'd met her at a hotel bar in Biloxi 26 months ago. It started as nothing. He hadn't planned any of it. It got away from him. The wedding was insane. He knew it was insane. She'd pushed for it. They'd both been drinking. It wasn't legal. It couldn't be legal. It was basically a party. Still loved me. That was the part he kept coming back to, like a man patting his pockets for keys. He still loved me. He'd ended it. The second he got my text, he said he'd known. He'd called her from the airport and ended it. I listened. I asked questions in a small, wounded, cooperative voice, and every single question I asked had been chosen at Ruth Dabney's kitchen table of a mind 8 hours earlier. How long? 26 months. Did she know about me? A pause of maybe 2 seconds. She knew I was married. Where did you get the license? Sevier County. Gatlinburg. It's a tourist thing, Clara. People do it as a joke. Who was in the pews? Her mother. Her sister, some friends of hers. Her mother was there. Yes. I nodded. I put the little screwdriver down and I said, I need some time. Let's just get through this week. And he exhaled so hard that his shoulders dropped 2 inches, and he said thank you. And he went upstairs and slept for 11 hours. What he did not know, could not have known, was that while he was in the air, I had forwarded that 19-second video to Ruth Dabney, and Ruth Dabney had forwarded it to a woman named Alma Prentice, who had been a fraud investigator for an insurance company for 22 years before she went out on her own. And Alma Prentice had already started pulling the joint credit card statements that were, as a matter of law, as much mine as his. I have thought a lot about why he was so careless. 18 months of hotel charges on a card that came to our mailbox, flights booked with our travel points, and I've concluded it wasn't arrogance. Exactly. It was that he had never once in 26 months imagined a version of me who would look. Alma's first packet came on a Saturday. I read it at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold beside me. 22 hotel stays in 26 months, across 9 cities, every single one of them on a trip I had known about and believed in and packed a bag for. Restaurant charges, a jewelry store in Ridgeland, a spa weekend in Point Clear, flights, gas, and at the very back, the thing that made me set the cup down. $18,000 drawn from our home equity line of credit 14 months earlier in a single transfer described on the statement as a wire. I called my friend Nadine Falco that night. Nadine and I have known each other since we were 19. She examines titles for a living, which is to say she spends her days reading the public record of who owns what. And she is the only person I've ever met who finds a chain of title genuinely thrilling. "Give me a county," she said. "Harrison." She called me back in 40 minutes. There was a condominium in Gulfport, 4 blocks off the beach. Purchased 14 months earlier. The earnest money and closing costs came to just about $18,000. The deed listed 2 names, Grant Whitmore, Kelsey Rourke. I sat on my screened porch with the magnolia dropping its leaves like it was firing people, and I did the arithmetic, and it came to $83,400 of our money, spent building a life I was never going to be allowed to enter. That was the night I stopped thinking of it as a marriage. From then on, in my own head, it was a case. Ruth filed on a Thursday morning, 23 days after the video. Adultery, pled specifically, and a separate action in circuit court against Kelsey Rourke. I had not warned him. For 3 weeks I had been exactly what I'd promised to be, which was calm, distracted, sad, quiet, moving through the house like a woman doing hard, private work on her feelings. He had stopped going to the gym. He had cooked dinner twice, badly, and I had eaten it. He was performing a reformed man for an audience he could not read, and it was making him frantic in a way he couldn't name. The process server found him in the parking lot of a clinic in Tupelo at 10:40 in the morning. He was home by 1. He came through the front door, and he wasn't holding flowers this time, and the softness was gone out of his face entirely, and I understood that I was finally meeting the man who had signed that license. "You filed." "I did. You've been sitting across the table from me for 3 weeks. You've been sitting across the table from me for 26 months. He put his hands on the back of a chair. Ruth Dabney, he said. You went to Ruth Dabney. Do you have any idea what that's going to cost? Do you understand that this is going to be a war? That's a strange thing to say, I said, to somebody who's just responding. His phone rang. He looked at the screen and something happened in his face. A small recalibration, like a man being handed a script, and he went out onto the porch to take it. When he came back in, he was steadier, and that made me pay much closer attention, not less. Kelsey's mother, he said, is Deborah Rourke. I waited. She sat on the Chancery bench in Harrison County for 19 years. He said it carefully, letting it land. She knows every judge in this state. She knows people you've never heard of. Okay, I said. That's it? Okay? I don't know what you want me to say, Grant. Is that a threat? It's a fact. Then thank you for the fact. He left that night. He packed badly, the way people do when they've decided the packing itself is an argument, and he went to stay with a friend in Jackson. He left half his shirts. He left the good watch I gave him for our 10th. He left the charger for his laptop, which I mailed back to him, because Ruth said to. The cats did not appear to notice. I noticed. 9 days later, a florist's van pulled into my driveway, and a kid in a polo shirt carried a white orchid up my front steps, not a bouquet. A living orchid in a heavy ceramic pot. The kind that costs $150 and requires a person to understand humidity. The card was handwritten. Clara, I know this is painful for everyone involved. I'd like to sit down with you, woman to woman. I think we understand each other better than you'd expect. Kelsey I stood on my porch in the October light and looked at that orchid for a long time. I photographed the plant. I photographed the card, front and back. I photographed the delivery slip. Then I left the orchid exactly where it was on the top step and I called Ruth. She made contact, I said, and read her the card. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Don't touch it. Don't return it. Don't respond. I'll log the date and the time. If she does it again, same thing. What is she doing? She's taking your temperature, Ruth said. She wants to know if you're the kind of woman who screams or the kind who can be handled. And Clara, that plant did not come from her alone. That came out of a conversation. Probably 3 of them. I thought about that for a long time after we hung up. A 29-year-old real estate agent. I knew her age by then, and her brokerage, and the name of her golden retriever, sending a $150 orchid to the wife of the man she'd been sleeping with for 26 months, as an opening position. It would have been funny if it hadn't been so clarifying, because it told me the single most useful thing I learned in that entire year, which was this. I was not dealing with a girl who'd gotten in over her head. I was dealing with a woman protecting an investment. That was the week I told people. Not everyone. 4 people. Nadine, who already knew. My cousin Doreen in Memphis, who cried harder than I did, and then drove down with a car full of groceries. Dr. Yvonne Sackett, a therapist my internist recommended, who I started seeing every other Wednesday, and who never once offered me an easy piece of comfort in 11 months. And my boss, Warren Tull, to whom I said only that I was going through a divorce and that it might make my calendar unpredictable for a while. Warren looked at me across his desk and said, "Take what you need. Your projects are fine." And I felt something in my chest come loose, which was the specific relief of not carrying a thing alone. That's the part nobody tells you. Betrayal is not the heaviest thing. Secrecy is the heaviest thing. The moment 4 people knew, the weight redistributed, and I could stand up straight again. The orchid was still on the step at Thanksgiving. The UPS driver stepped around it every time. It bloomed, actually, which I found unbearably funny. In November, I drove down to the coast and took the boat out to Ship Island. I left Otis and Clementine with the Pruitts next door, who have taken our mail and our cats for 11 years, and who never once, in the entire ordeal, asked me a single question about the strange cars in my driveway, which is a form of love I've come to value above almost all others. 2 days, no laptop, no strategy. I walked the length of that beach twice and ate shrimp out of a paper basket and read a novel I'd been carrying around unopened since 2019, and on the second evening I sat on the ferry dock and let the wind take my hair apart and understood that I was not sad anymore in the way I had been sad. I was ready. That's the only word. Not vengeful, not righteous. Ready. They came to my house on a Saturday in December. I was in the backyard raking when I heard the bell. 2 shapes through the glass. I knew one of them by the shoulders. Kelsey Rourke was prettier in person and dressed for the part. A soft blue sweater, small earrings, no makeup to speak of, the visual language of reasonable. Grant stood half a step behind her, and that half step told me everything about whose idea this had been. "Clara," he said, "can we come in?" "No," I said, "but I'll stand here a minute." She spoke first, which had obviously been the plan. She was sorry. She was so sorry. She'd been young. She said that I was young, at 29, and she'd made choices she wished she could take back. She wanted me to know there was no hostility on her side. She and Grant were prepared to be reasonable. Nobody was trying to take anything from me. "We think," Grant said, "that pushing the fault claim is going to hurt you more than it helps, financially. And the other thing, the circuit court thing." He couldn't say the words. I noticed. "That's not going to go the way you think." "We've spoken with my mother," Kelsey said. "I'm aware, an equitable split, private mediation, no adultery on the record." She leaned in a little. "That protects you too, Clara. You don't want this in the public record any more than we do." And I looked at her with what I hope was polite interest, the way you look at something in a display case. "Let me make sure I have it," I said. "You'd like me to withdraw a claim my attorney tells me is well supported, submit to a private process on terms you've already settled with your mother, and I should do all of that in order to protect myself. That's not a productive way to frame it. It's an accurate way to frame it. It's an accurate way to frame it. You slept with my husband for 26 months. You stood in a chapel in Tennessee and accepted a ring from a man who was legally married to me, and your mother sat in the second pew, and now you're on my porch explaining what's best for me." The warmth stayed on her face. It just stopped reaching her eyes. Grant stepped forward. "Clara, be realistic. Deborah has resources. She's willing to use them. You want to spend 3 years and $40,000 turning this into a circus?" There it was. The threat, wearing the coat of advice, resources, circus, the word chosen to make me the problem. "I appreciate you both coming in person," I said. "It's been very informative. Ruth will call about scheduling. Clara, I'd like you off my property now." And I stood in the doorway with my hand on the edge of the door. Something crossed Kelsey Rourke's face then. One flash, gone almost before it arrived, and it was not sorrow, and it was not shame. It was rage, pure, undiluted, and I thought entirely honest. The first honest thing she'd shown me. Then she touched Grant's sleeve and walked to the car. He stayed a second longer. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Maybe. Drive safe." I shut the door and leaned my back against it, and the cats came and pushed at my ankles, and I let myself be afraid for exactly 60 seconds because I was. Deborah Rourke was not nobody. 3 years was not nothing. $40,000 was not nothing. And then the fear did something I didn't expect. it turned over and became fuel, because they had driven 5 hours to stand on my porch. Whatever they thought of me, they were afraid of my case, which meant my case was worth being afraid of. I called Ruth on Monday and told her to move on everything. Now I have to tell you the part I've been circling, because for 4 months, in the middle of all of it, one question sat in the back of my skull like a stone in a shoe. Who sent me the video? Ruth had asked in the first meeting. Alma had tried the number and found it dead, a prepaid phone activated in Knoxville and never used again. I had lain awake more nights than I'll admit, running through people. A jealous coworker of his, someone at the chapel, a stranger. The answer arrived in February in an email to Ruth's office from a lawyer in Biloxi, representing a witness who wished to be deposed voluntarily. Her name was Tessa Rourke. She was 24 years old. She was Kelsey's younger sister, and she was the one holding the camera. She had filmed the whole ceremony on her phone, the way you do, because her sister was getting married and somebody had to. She'd cut a 19-second clip to send to a cousin. 2 months later, she was helping her sister clear out an overloaded iCloud account, and there was a shared photo album that Grant had left synced from a phone he'd replaced years earlier and forgotten about. Old photos, hundreds of them. And in the middle of them, a woman in a green dress with her arms around him at what was unmistakably a wedding reception. Not Kelsey's, and a Christmas photo, and a photo of a magnolia tree in a front yard taken from a screened porch, tagged with a house on Locust Street in Oxford, Mississippi. Tessa Rourke did what any 24-year-old would do. She looked me up, and she found a woman who was very much alive and very much married and very much unaware. She said in her deposition that she sat with it for 11 days. She said she asked her sister a question, once, obliquely, and got an answer that made her stop asking. She said she thought about telling her mother and understood, in a way she couldn't fully explain, that this would be the end of it, and nothing further would happen. So she drove to a Walmart, bought a prepaid phone with cash, sent me 19 seconds of video, and threw the phone in a dumpster behind a Cracker Barrel. Ruth asked her why, and Tessa Rourke said, "And this is in the record, so I can tell you exactly. Because my sister is going to hate me for the rest of her life, and my sister is going to be fine. And that woman was in her own house not knowing anything, and she was not going to be fine. I have never met her. I don't expect to. There's no version of a conversation between us that either of us could survive. But I think about her more than I think about Grant, and when I am old, I expect I will still be thinking about her, standing in the back of a chapel with her phone up, filming the worst thing she would ever see." The deposition was in March, in a conference room in Jackson with a window that didn't open. Grant had counsel by then, a Gulfport attorney named Emmett Ferris, retained, everyone understood, at Deborah Rourke's direction. I hadn't seen my husband in 11 weeks. He looked smaller, not thinner, less assembled. Ruth Dabney does not raise her voice, and watching her work was like watching a building go up exactly according to a drawing you'd seen months earlier. Every question had been built around something we already had, so that each answer either confirmed the document or created a contradiction the record would keep forever. The $83,400. He confirmed the charges because they were on a statement with his signature on the back of the card, and he characterized them as personal spending he had always intended to repay. The conference. He confirmed there had been no Ohio Valley Specialty Sales Summit. He confirmed he had told me there was. Then Ruth introduced the cell site records, obtained through proper channels, showing where his phone had been for 26 months. 9 cities, 22 hotel stays. Not one of them matched a place he had told me he would be. Ferris's objections came faster. Grant's answers got shorter. But the moment I'd been waiting for came in the last hour. Deborah Rourke had submitted a sworn declaration. It said that her daughter had been deceived, that Grant Whitmore had represented himself as separated, that a divorce was imminent, that his wife knew and had consented, and that Kelsey had entered the relationship in good faith. It was a careful document. A retired Chancery judge had put her name on it. Ruth had known it was coming. She'd told me so in January. She entered one exhibit, a text message thread between Grant and Kelsey, from 13 months into the relationship, pulled from his own phone through the discovery process, with his own attorney's signature on the production. Kelsey, is she going to be a problem or not? Grant, she won't do anything. She never does. You know how she is. Kelsey, then I want both names on the deed. The court reporter's fingers stopped. Emmett Ferris read it twice. I watched Grant look at that page, and I watched something behind his eyes simply lie down. She had not been deceived. She had asked the deceived answer, and then she had negotiated her security. The declaration that a retired judge had sworn to in her own hand with her professional name on it was contradicted line for line by her own daughter's text messages. Ferris asked for a recess. I sat in the hallway with Ruth while she made notes. There was a plastic ficus in the corner and a water fountain that groaned. They never read the whole thread, she said, not looking up. They read enough to build their story. We read all of it. He didn't know that was in there. No. She capped her pen. Are you all right? I sat with the question honestly. Down the hall, behind a closed door, my husband of 13 years was told by his lawyer exactly how bad his afternoon had been. Yes, I said, and I was. When we came back in, Grant looked at me for the first time all day. I held it. I didn't glare and I didn't soften. 13 years and one Wednesday morning in Jackson. Then I looked down at my notes and Ruth said, Mr. Whitmore, I'd like to return to the marriage license application. Here is how it ended, and I'm going to give you the numbers. Because when I was sitting where you might be sitting, every story I found ended in a fog of feelings, and what I wanted was arithmetic. 9 weeks after that deposition, we settled. Ferris advised him to take it. Ruth heard from a colleague that what he actually said was, "You do not want a judge reading these documents out loud." I kept the house on Locust Street, free and clear, bought out against his share of the retirement accounts, with an additional offset for what the Chancellor's order called marital waste. The $83,400 itemized across 9 pages. Every charge cross-referenced to a hotel folio, a flight record, or a deed. My 401(ng) remained entirely mine. The portion of his retirement accumulated during the marriage was divided, and my share was substantial. He got the leased Acura and the balance on the home equity line of credit that had bought a condominium I have never seen. He got the good watch back. He got the sewing machine's original manual, which he had somehow ended up with, and which he mailed to me with no note. The court allocated a significant portion of my attorney's fees to him, given the conduct in the record. The circuit court case against Kelsey Rourke settled 2 months later before it ever saw a jury, for $140,000. I want to be careful here because I know how this sounds. I did not sue that woman for revenge. I sued her because her name was on a deed purchased with money that was half mine, and because, in the state where I live, the law says that what she did to my marriage is a thing with a price, and I had 13 years of evidence that the marriage was real. Ruth said something to me once that I've never forgotten. She said, "The law doesn't care how you feel. That's what makes it useful." And the marriage license application, the one where he swore under oath in Sevier County, Tennessee, that he was not married, that went to a district attorney's office because Ruth was obligated to send it and because it was true. There was no trial. He pled. There was a fine and probation and a small item in a small paper. His employer had a policy about that sort of thing, and he was let go in September, 3 days short of a year from the afternoon a vending machine hummed beside me in a hallway. He called me once, 4 months after everything was signed. He started with my name, and I could hear that he'd rehearsed an opening and had nothing at all after it. "I wish you well, Grant," I said. "Please don't call me again." And here's the thing that startled me as it came out of my mouth. I meant it, both halves. I did not want him to suffer. I have never once, in the years since, wished him harm. He did enormous and deliberate damage to a life 2 people built, and the law answered him without any sentiment whatsoever, and I was finished. Not performing finished. Finished. He didn't call again. Ruth Dabney sent me a card when the last document was filed. It said in her handwriting, "Well done." Alma Prentice sent an invoice. That first year was the quietest of my adult life, and I mean that as the highest praise I know how to give. In February, I painted the living room a deep terracotta that Grant had vetoed for 11 years in favor of something he called neutral, which I have since decided is a word cowards use. I painted it myself, badly at the corners, better as I went, and when I stood in the doorway on a Sunday afternoon and watched that color eat the light, I felt something almost embarrassingly close to joy. I put in a garden that sprang with far more enthusiasm than skill. The tomatoes all came at once and defeated me. I gave sacks of them to the Pruitts, who accepted them without comment, as they had accepted everything else. I bought a wide armchair and a good lamp, and I sat in it on Sunday mornings for hours, reading, not checking the time, not feeling that I ought to be doing something for someone. That permission to simply be still without managing another person's comfort was newer to me at 43 than it should have been. The cats thrived. Otis developed a philosophy about the afternoon sun on the porch boards that I found reasonable and encouraged. In April, Warren Tull offered me a position I would have hesitated over a year earlier. I said yes in the room, without asking for a night to think about it, and I started the following Monday, and the work felt like mine in a way that work had not felt in a decade. Dr. Sackett and I spent most of that year not on Grant. We spent it on the woman who had built her whole self-image around being reasonable, around being easy, around trusting without ever once verifying, and who had mistaken that for a virtue instead of what it partly was, which was a wish not to know. I hear things about them the way you do. I don't go looking. Grant is in Jackson, selling something else. He and Kelsey lasted about as long as the money did. Deborah Rourke retired from the boards she sat on, quietly, the way people do. Tessa Rourke, I'm told, doesn't speak to her family. When I let myself sit with all that, what I feel is not satisfaction. It's more like watching weather move across a place I used to live. Things that are set in motion keep moving. The trajectory was theirs. The destination was never up to me. On the anniversary, I drove back down to the coast and took the boat out to Ship Island. Same wind, same shrimp in a paper basket. I sat on the ferry dock until the light went orange and then blue. I thought about the woman standing outside a conference room with her thumb on a screen, watching 19 seconds of the end of her life 4 times, and then walking back in to finish the staffing meeting. She was terrified. I can say that now plainly, without any shame at all. Terrified and humiliated and completely alone with it in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in a building full of people who had no idea. but she went out to her car and she picked up her phone and she typed one word, "Congratulations." And then she did not flinch from a single thing that came after it.